waiting patiently in Brazil. I mean, I never thought I'd ever say that in my life. Is Juliano Fiori. Are you there, Juliano?
Hi, can you hear me, Crispin?
I can, yeah. Juliano, you're the Alborada contributory editor, and you're out there in Rio.
That's right. I live here in Rio.
Wow.
I've lived here for the past 6.5 years. Before that, I lived in the UK. I was born in the UK, but I'm half Brazilian, so I've spent a lot of my life out here too.
Great. Now, look, we haven't got very much time, but because you've got to go off quite soon.
All right.
I've just been reading a background on what's happening in Brazil, and it's quite incredible. We're talking about Julian Assange. I mean, Lula, what's happened with him in his journey, his political journey? I mean, can you tell people how he's been handled by the establishment in Brazil?
Yeah, I can. Well, I'd like to start, first of all, by offering my solidarity to Stella and thank her for her words and for the others who have spoken since I've been on the call listening, and to Julian and to the cause. So I think maybe I don't want to dodge your question, but I feel that diving straight into that question about Lula might not give us the opportunity to understand his positioning in what's going on more generally in Brazil.
Okay, I'll let you go. I'll let you go where you want to go.
No, well, no, I can say very briefly that Lula is by far the most important popular politician in Brazilian history, and as such, he represents a pretty complex trajectory. His own political career, forged in the union movements in the late 1970s and then in institutional politics, has been one of mixed fate, despite the fact that he was by far the most popular president in Brazil, leaving with 80% approval rating. And in more recent times, after he left office, his successor in the same party, Dilma Rousseff, was impeached, and then he was imprisoned on essentially trumped up charges of corruption, and this was part of a broader attempt which links the politicization of the judiciary to delegitimize the left and to marginalize it from power, from the levers of power. But the reason why I think it's important to connect that to what's going on today is because the judiciary today is taking a very different stance with respect to the left, and this is of convenience. It's not because it's institutionally shifted position or structurally shifted position, but I'm sure many of you will have seen the results from Sunday, and to a person who doesn't follow Brazilian politics, that result might have seemed like a resounding success for the left. Lula achieved 48.4% of the vote, which is more than he's achieved in any other election. It's more than Dilma Rousseff achieved in the first round in her elections. In fact, it's more than any politician has achieved in the first round without going on to win. So more votes, sorry, than any other politician has achieved in the first round. But Jair Bolsonaro managed to get 43.2%, which is about 7% more than he was polling. And so the left the day after was sort of experienced a certain hangover, that is a disillusionment with the fact that he didn't win in the first round. And there was a general feeling of dejection, in fact. And there's been a lot of questioning as to what happened. What went wrong with the polls in particular, which is a question that we've asked ourselves repeatedly over the last decade, not only in Brazil, in fact, in other places where there's been a sort of insurgent force on the right. And one of the responses that's been given here is that there was a sudden swing, a last minute swing to Bolsonaro from the centrist candidates. I say centrist, in fact, it's not quite a centrism that exists in Brazil. There was a sort of opportunism, people who are swinging between left and right to try and steal votes as a sort of third way. And that there could have been a last minute swing. which might have been the case, but that misses the fact that polls have repeatedly failed to capture this insurgent vote from the right over the last 10 years. And also from the congressional votes, the right was very successful in getting people into Congress, not just the right, in fact, the far right, into Congress and into the Senate, suggests that the rightward shift in Brazilian politics is something that is more structural. In fact, to quote a friend and colleague of mine, Benjamin Fogel, if Bolsonaro loses, Bolsonarismo, the movement that has formed around him, is here to stay. I think that our very dejection on the left is in fact indicative of our predicament, really. Our surprise that this is the case is indicative of our predicament. And when I say that, I think it's because there's been a tendency to analyze the collapse of the left in power over the last 6-7 years in particular, that is either certainly among the sort of more diehard fans of the Workers' Party, portrayed everything as a grand conspiracy against the Workers' Party that started with the protests in 2013 and went through impeachment, went through Lula's imprisonment and Jair Bolsonaro's election. Or critics from the left of the Workers' Party have tended to point to political shortcomings or even policy failings. And I certainly wouldn't deny that there's some element of both of those involved. There's been certainly intrigue which has been aimed at marginalizing the left, and there were political shortcomings within the PT government. But I think this misses the underlying tendency, that is the material basis of the changes that have occurred in Brazilian politics. And we should be looking to questions of social formation in Brazil. In fact, rather than social formation, we might refer to social deformation in Brazil, and what is essentially a process of capitalist disintegration across the country. I wouldn't be so bold as to suggest a sort of grand explanation of what's going on, but we need to look to the way in which the dynamic center of Brazilian capitalism has shifted from the Southeast and manufacturing industry to the center west and agribusiness. And the class interests that have formed around that shift. We need to look to the shifting frontier of capitalist expansion in the Amazon region, the social conflict, extreme social conflict that's taking place as part of a sort of process of primitive accumulation, and again, how people are lining on different sides of a class divide. And then perhaps most importantly, we need to take into account the expansion of precariat here in Brazil, the reduction of formalized labor, the impossibility of inclusion within the labor market, or instrumental inclusion within the labor market, and a sort of war for work that has been bubbling away for a few decades. And this was certainly in process before Lula came into power. In fact, it's something that really we can look to the abandonment of the sort of developmentalist strategies that were even implemented by the military dictatorship. And in fact, you can't understand why democracy came about in Brazil without understanding that the elite, or certainly the liberal elite, needed to abandon or wanted to abandon those developmentalist strategies. But that meant that the possibility of creating a sort of broad work society of inclusion, everybody with decent pay, workers' rights, etc., became increasingly difficult. And in this context, it's necessary to understand what Lula's government was about. And certainly Lula's government was by far the most successful popular government in Brazilian history. In fact, arguably in Latin American history. His record in inclusion, poverty reduction is incontestable. But it wasn't a government of social transformation. If anything, it was a government of management of this process of disintegration. One that, you can argue either side of whether it was possible to do more or not, but certainly it was about putting the brakes on this process, let's say. In that context, what this new right is about is accelerating this process of disintegration. And why that's important is because when tensions start to build around 2013, the center right effectively abandons the PT or the sort of civil accord that existed between center right and center left. That's also partly because the industrialists were losing their stronghold over Brazilian capitalism. the industrialists who supported the center-right. They then opened the ground for the new right to emerge, for Bolsonaro to become, to be invented essentially as a political candidate, or as a presidential candidate. He was a totally marginal, ridiculous figure in Brazilian politics. And then what's now happened is that this center-right has absolutely disintegrated. These elections show that the center-right really doesn't exist in Brazil. And the elite has migrated, a broad part of the elite has migrated to the far right, presumably in response to what it sees as a threat. Obviously, this threat from the left is sort of their conspiratorial thinking.
I'm aware that you've got to go in a minute. I'm just wondering, you seem a little despondent before the end of the month. You said that even if Lula wins, then the Bolsonaro movement will be strong. So is that your feeling that it's a kind of, he can't really win in a sense?
No, it's not despondent, and I think what's necessary here in Brazil, and I say this to an external public, because in some sense this makes the urgency of campaigning for Lula's victory even more. It heightens the urgency of the work we have to do over the next 4 weeks, but because we need to recognize what's at stake. So what's at stake isn't our grand ambitions on the left of surpassing a political horizon and inventing the future, etc. What's at stake is a certain kind of order, a minimum sort of order that enables survival in contemporary capitalist democracy. The challenge for us on the left, if Lula wins, is that by representing order, or by standing up for the order, which conventionally, obviously, the left has opposed, the sort of anti-establishment force might continue to grow. And at the moment, the anti-establishment force is much more on the right than it is on the left. So then there needs to be some sort of a strategy for engaging with anti-establishment sentiment. But it's absolutely essential that Lula wins this election. It really is sort of, we're on the precipice of barbarism if he doesn't. Bolsonaro represents the sort of worst of a demodernizing tendency that is ultra-violent, that sort of is nostalgic of the worst elements of the worst aspects of Brazilian history, and has sort of grand illusions of Brazil's possibilities in the world, which also are in total contradiction with the way it acts in international relations.
Wow. You've got to come on again. We'll give you more time. And just before the election, the next one, because I'm fascinated by what's happening there. It's a very important issue for the whole world, what's happening in Brazil. And your Zoom's good, considering you're so miles away from here. Your picture's good. Your picture's better than if it was round the corner from me. Thank you, Juliano.
Thanks a lot, Crispin. It'll be a pleasure to join you again.